My mother told me not to tell anyone about my pregnancy. When I finally did, the truth about why left everyone speechless. I was 17 when I realized I was pregnant. 3 months along before I even noticed because my periods had always been irregular. I told my mom first, terrified she'd scream or cry or kick me out. Instead, she went completely calm. Too calm. "Sit down," she said quietly. "We need to talk about this carefully." She explained that I couldn't tell anyone yet. Not my dad, not my friends, definitely not the father. She said we needed time to figure things out, make a plan. It seemed reasonable. I was scared and confused, so I agreed. The first month was fine. Mom took me to doctor appointments in the next town over. She paid cash for everything. She'd schedule them during school hours and write me excuse notes. The obstetrician never asked why we were being so secretive. I assumed Mom had explained something to her privately. By month 5, my clothes were getting tight. I started wearing baggy hoodies and oversized jackets. My best friend Tessa asked if I was okay because I'd been acting weird. I wanted so badly to tell her, but Mom's voice echoed in my head. Not yet. Just a little longer. Month 6 came and I couldn't hide it anymore. Dad still hadn't noticed, which seemed impossible. But he was always working late, coming home after I'd gone to bed. Mom said she'd tell him soon. She just needed the timing to be right. One afternoon, I came home early from school and heard my mom on the phone in her bedroom. The door was cracked open. "Yes, everything is going according to plan," she said. "Another 3 months and we'll have what we need." No, she has no idea. Trust me, I've handled everything perfectly. My blood went cold. I stood frozen in the hallway. She's completely isolated now. Hasn't told a single person. When the time comes, there won't be anyone to question it. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. What did she mean? Question what? That night at dinner, I watched my mom carefully. She smiled at me, asked about my day, reminded me to take my prenatal vitamins. She looked like my mom, but the person I'd heard on the phone was someone else entirely. I waited until 2 a.m., then crept into her office. I needed to find something, anything that would explain what I'd heard. I went through her desk drawers as quietly as possible. Bills, receipts, old photos, nothing unusual. Then I found the locked file cabinet in her closet. I used a bobby pin to pop the cheap lock. Inside were folders labeled with dates and legal terms I didn't understand. Adoption agreements, medical release forms. And then I saw it. A contract between my mother and a private adoption agency. Payment terms. $175,000 upon successful delivery of healthy infant. Signed 3 months ago, right after I told her I was pregnant. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the papers. But there was more. Underneath were emails between my mom and someone named Virginia. They discussed keeping me isolated, making sure I didn't bond with the baby, ensuring I had no support system when the time came. Virginia assured my mom that teenage mothers almost always sign the papers when properly handled, especially when they believed they had no other choice. The last email was dated yesterday. "We've found the perfect couple," Virginia wrote. "They're willing to pay an additional $25,000 if the birth mother doesn't attempt contact later. I recommend we proceed with the isolation protocol exactly as planned." I sat on the closet floor, staring at these documents, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mother had been planning to sell my baby since the moment I told her I was pregnant. Everything, every kind word, every doctor appointment, every piece of advice about keeping it secret, it had all been part of a plan to take my child. The isolation protocol, that's what Virginia had called it. I thought back over the past 6 months, how Mom had discouraged me from seeing Tessa, saying she was a bad influence, that I needed to focus on school and my health. How she'd convinced me to quit my part-time job at the coffee shop because standing all day wasn't good for the baby, even though we needed the money. How she'd talked me out of telling Tyler, the father, because he'd just pressure me to make decisions I wasn't ready for, when really Tyler had always been supportive and kind. She hadn't been protecting me. She'd been cutting off every lifeline I had. I took photos of everything with my phone. Every document, every email, every page of the contract. My hands were shaking so badly I had to take some photos twice. There were pages about medical histories, genetic testing, even a personality assessment Mom had filled out about me without my knowledge. She'd described me as compliant, easily influenced, and unlikely to cause problems. Reading those words felt like being stabbed. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and locked the cabinet. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, my hand on my stomach, feeling the baby kick. I'd been trying not to think about it as a real person. Mom had discouraged that too, always calling it the fetus or the pregnancy, never your baby. She'd never asked me about names or whether I wanted to know the gender. She'd kept everything clinical and distant. But now I felt every movement like a message. This was my child, and my mother was planning to take it from me for $200,000. I spent the pre-dawn hours scrolling through the photos on my phone, reading every word again and again. There were text messages too, ones I'd missed the first time. Messages between Mom and Virginia about how to handle me if I became resistant. Suggestions about finding a therapist who would encourage adoption. Plans to take me out of state for the birth so there'd be fewer legal complications. They'd thought of everything. Every possible scenario where I might fight back, they had a strategy to neutralize it. The next morning, I acted completely normal. I ate breakfast, let Mom drive me to school, pretended everything was fine. She hummed along to the radio and asked if I wanted to stop for a smoothie after my next doctor's appointment, as if she was actually a caring mother and not someone planning to traffic my baby. But as soon as she pulled away from the curb, I walked straight to the guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Henley had always been kind to me. She'd helped me through some tough stuff when my parents were going through their rough patch 2 years ago. If there was anyone I could trust, it was her. I'd seen her stand up to administration when they tried to expel a student unfairly. I'd watched her fight for kids who had no one else fighting for them. "I need to talk to you," I said, closing her office door. "It's about my mom. And I need you to believe me because this is going to sound insane." Mrs. Henley gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I believe you already, Claire. Tell me everything." I showed her the photos on my phone. I watched her face change as she scrolled through them, from confusion to horror to something I couldn't quite read. Fury, maybe. The kind of cold, controlled anger that meant someone was about to take action. "How far along are you?" she asked quietly. 7 months. "And you haven't told anyone except your mother?" "No one. She told me not to. She said people would judge me, that they'd try to pressure me, that I needed to keep it private until I was ready. I thought she was protecting me." Mrs. Henley set my phone down carefully. "Oh, honey, she wasn't protecting you. She was isolating you." I started crying then, the kind of ugly crying where you can't breathe properly. Mrs. Henley came around her desk and hugged me, and I sobbed into her shoulder while she rubbed my back and told me I was safe now. When I finally calmed down enough to talk, she handed me tissues and pulled her chair next to mine. "I'm calling Child Protective Services," she said. "What your mother is doing, this isn't just unethical, it's illegal. It's trafficking, and we're going to stop it right now." "But what if they don't believe me? What if my mom has an explanation that makes sense?" Mrs. Henley held up my phone. "Claire, the evidence is right here. Your mother signed a contract to sell your baby before you even knew what was happening. There's no explanation that makes this okay." She made 3 phone calls while I sat there. First to CPS, then to the school district's legal department, then to someone she called her friend from law school who specialized in family law. Within 20 minutes, multiple systems were activating to protect me. The next 72 hours were a blur. CPS showed up at my house that afternoon with a police officer. I'd been sitting in Mrs. Henley's office, watching the clock, knowing what was about to happen but still not fully believing it. Mrs. Henley had called my dad at work. She told him he needed to come home immediately, that it was about me, but I was safe. She didn't tell him why. She said that conversation needed to happen in person. When Dad arrived home and saw the CPS worker and police officer in our living room, his face went white. He looked at me, searching for signs of injury or distress. "What's going on? Is Claire okay?" "I'm okay, Dad," I said quietly. "But there's something you need to know." My mother denied everything at first, claimed I was making it up because I was scared and confused about being pregnant. She looked at Dad with these big, wounded eyes. "I can't believe she's doing this," Mom said. "I've been trying to help her through this pregnancy, and now she's accusing me of these horrible things. You know how teenagers can be, how they twist things." The CPS worker, a woman named Patricia with short gray hair and eyes that had seen everything, cut through Mom's performance like a knife. "Mrs. Morrison, we're not here based on your daughter's word alone. We have documentation. Would you like to tell us about the contract you signed with Virginia Hartwell of Precious Beginnings Adoption Services?" Mom's face changed. Just for a second, the mask slipped and I saw something cold and calculating underneath. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Then you won't mind if we search your home office?" Patricia said. "We have a warrant." The warrant. That had been what the phone calls were about. Mrs. Henley's law school friend had contacts at the DA's office. With the photos from my phone, they'd been able to get an emergency warrant in record time. Mom tried to say something about rights and lawyers, but Dad interrupted her. "If there's a warrant, let them search," he said. His voice was shaking. He looked at me. "Claire, are you pregnant?" "Yes." "For how long?" 7 months. He sat down heavily on the couch. 7 months. "And I didn't know." "Mom told me not to tell you," I said. "She said we needed to wait for the right time." Dad looked at Mom like she was a stranger. "What right time? What were you planning?" That's when they asked to see her office. Mom stood in the hallway while they searched, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Dad stood next to me, his hand on my shoulder. He kept squeezing it, like he needed to confirm I was really there. When Patricia emerged from the office carrying the locked file cabinet, Mom finally broke. "You can't take that," she said. "That's private property." "It's evidence," Patricia said calmly. They brought in a locksmith right there. It took him less than 5 minutes to open the cabinet, and then they pulled out folder after folder of documents. Dad read over Patricia's shoulder. I watched his face as he took in the contract, the payment terms, the emails about keeping me isolated. At one point, he made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. When he looked at Mom, there was something in his expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, something colder. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Mom tried to explain. She said she'd only been trying to help me, that I was too young to raise a child, that she'd wanted to make sure the baby went to a good home and received compensation for the hardship I'd been through. "Compensation," Dad repeated. "You mean you wanted money for our daughter's baby?" "For our daughter's hardship," Mom corrected. "Do you know how hard teenage motherhood is? I was trying to protect her from that." "And yes, we would have been compensated, but that money would have gone to Claire's college fund." "There's nothing in these documents about a college fund," Patricia said. "All payments were designated to go directly to you, Mrs. Morrison." "That was going to be a surprise," Mom insisted, but her voice had lost its conviction. The police officer spoke for the first time. "Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us. We have some questions." "Are you arresting me?" Mom's voice went shrill. "Not at this time. But we need you to come to the station voluntarily. If you refuse, we can get an arrest warrant. Mom looked at Dad. Are you going to let them do this? To your wife? The mother of your child? Dad didn't answer her. He was still reading through the documents, his hands shaking. There's an email here, he said slowly, where you discuss how to keep this from me. You told Virginia that I work long hours and wouldn't notice. That you could manage me. Mom reached for him. Honey, I can explain. Don't touch me, he said, stepping back. Don't ever touch me again. Mom left with the police officer. Patricia stayed with us to explain what would happen next. There would be an investigation. They'd interview me extensively. They'd contact the adoption agency. They'd determine if this was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. That night, I stayed with Mrs. Henley and her wife. They set up their guest room for me, made me dinner, treated me like I was fragile and precious. Mrs. Henley's wife, Diana, was a pediatric nurse. She gave me a gentle checkup, made sure the baby and I were both healthy. You're going to be okay, Diana said softly. Both of you. I cried for the first time since finding those documents. Not quiet tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that felt like they'd tear me apart. Diana held me and let me cry, and Mrs. Henley sat on my other side with her hand on my back. When I finally calmed down, Mrs. Henley brought me tea and toast. I need to ask you some questions, she said gently, for the CPS report. Are you up for it? I nodded. She asked me about the past 7 months. Every detail, every appointment, every conversation with Mom, every moment I'd felt confused or pressured. I told her everything I could remember. She took notes, her handwriting neat and precise. Did your mother ever explicitly say you should give the baby up for adoption? No. She never said I should do anything specific. She just kept saying we needed to wait, to think carefully, to not make any hasty decisions. But she also discouraged me from researching parenting resources or looking at baby stuff. Whenever I tried to talk about the baby as real, she'd change the subject. That's manipulation, Mrs. Henley said. She was grooming you to hand over your baby without realizing you had other options. The investigation moved quickly once it started. Turned out, Virginia and her adoption agency had done this before. 7 other girls over the past 4 years, all teenagers, all isolated, all pressured into signing away their babies for large sums of money that went straight to the agency and the mothers who facilitated it. Patricia came to see me on day 3 of staying with Mrs. Henley. She brought files. I want to show you something, she said, but it's going to be hard to see. She opened a folder and pulled out photos of the other girls. They ranged from 14 to 18. Each photo showed a scared young face. Underneath each photo was a summary of what had happened to them. Jasmine, 16. Mother received $150,000. Jasmine attempted suicide 6 months after her baby was taken. Becca, 15. Mother received $180,000. Becca ran away from home and lived on the streets for 2 years. Kennedy, 17. Mother received $165,000. Kennedy is currently in therapy for PTSD. I read through all 7 stories. Each one was a variation of what had almost happened to me. Isolation, manipulation, coercion. Babies taken from girls who hadn't understood they had rights. The couples who adopted the babies had no idea, Patricia explained. They'd paid enormous fees, been told everything was legitimate. Virginia's agency had all the right paperwork, all the certifications. On paper, it looked completely legal, but it wasn't. No, because none of the birth mothers gave informed consent. They were manipulated into signing documents they didn't fully understand, often within hours of giving birth when they were exhausted and vulnerable. In some cases, the mothers were told they had no choice, that their own parents had already signed away rights. Can we stop this? Can we help those girls? We're trying. Some of the adoptions may be able to be reversed if the birth mothers want that. Others, it's been too long or the birth mothers don't want to disrupt their children's lives. But Virginia and everyone who worked with her, they're going to prison. What about my mom? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Your mother will likely face significant prison time. Conspiracy to commit fraud, coercion of a minor, illegal adoption facilitation, child trafficking. The DA is building a strong case. Child trafficking. The words made my stomach turn. That's what this is, Claire. Your mother was trafficking your baby. I know that's hard to hear, but you need to understand the severity of what almost happened. My dad filed for divorce the next day. He came to Mrs. Henley's house with his lawyer, a sharp woman named Diane who wore expensive suits and had a reputation for being ruthless in family court. I'm so sorry, Dad said to me. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. I should have known. I should have noticed. You're my daughter and I didn't even know you were pregnant. Mom hid it from you on purpose, I said. She planned it that way. That doesn't make it okay. I live in the same house. I should have seen. Diane cleared her throat. Mr. Morrison, we need to discuss Claire's custody and care going forward. Your wife is likely going to be incarcerated. Claire is still a minor, and she's pregnant. We need to establish legal guardianship and support. Dad didn't hesitate. Claire stays with me. Whatever she needs, I'll provide it. If she wants to keep the baby, I'll help. If she wants to pursue adoption, I'll help with that too. But it'll be her choice, and hers alone. For the first time in 7 months, someone was treating me like I had a say in my own life. We moved into a small apartment that weekend. Dad couldn't afford to keep the house on his own, and besides, neither of us wanted to live there anymore. The apartment was in a different school district, which meant I'd have to transfer schools for my senior year. But Mrs. Henley pulled strings to let me finish out the semester at my current school. I told Tessa everything. We met at a coffee shop and I laid out the whole story. I watched her face go through the same progression mine had. Disbelief, horror, fury. Your mom was going to sell your baby, she said flatly. Your actual mom. Yeah. Tessa reached across the table and grabbed my hand. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't push. My mom told me to stop hanging out with you. She said you were a bad influence. I'm a straight-A student who volunteers at the animal shelter, Tessa said. What kind of bad influence is that? The kind that would have helped me see what was happening. Tessa squeezed my hand. I'm here now. Whatever you need. I called Tyler that same day. We dated for a few months during junior year, then drifted apart. He deserved to know he was going to be a father, or had been going to be, depending on what I decided. When I called, he answered on the second ring. Claire? Hey, I haven't heard from you in forever. I need to talk to you. In person. It's important. There was a pause. Are you okay? Not really. Can you come over? He showed up an hour later with his mom. I thought they'd be angry or blame me for not telling him sooner. Instead, Angela, his mom, took one look at me and asked, How far along are you? 7.5 months. She sat down heavily. And Tyler's the father? Yes. Does he know? He does now. Tyler was staring at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. You're pregnant. With my baby. For 7 months. I told him everything. About mom, the adoption agency, the contract, the investigation. By the time I finished, Angela was crying and Tyler looked shell-shocked. I'm so sorry, he kept saying. I should have been there. I should have known. My mom made sure no one knew. That was the point. Angela pulled herself together. Okay, we need to figure this out. What do you want, Claire? What do you need? I don't know, I admitted. I'm still trying to process everything. That's okay, she said. You don't have to know right now. But we're here. Whatever you decide, we'll support you. We spent weeks researching options. Real adoption agencies. The legal kind, where mothers have rights and protection. Foster care systems. Parenting resources. Angela went to meetings with us, helped us understand what each path would look like. Tyler took parenting classes with me, even though neither of us had decided if we were keeping the baby. The media got wind of the story. Local news picked it up first, then it spread. Reporters called Mrs. Henley, the school, even some of my classmates. Mrs. Henley shielded me as much as possible, but there was only so much she could do. Then, a national news network wanted to interview me. Patricia thought it might help the case against Virginia and the adoption agency. I agreed, but only if they didn't show my face or use my real name. The interview aired on a Tuesday night. I watched it at Dad's apartment, curled up on the couch with him on one side and Mrs. Henley on the other. Hearing my own voice coming from the TV, talking about what Mom had done, felt surreal. The segment was called Stolen Futures, the dark side of private adoption. They interviewed me, 2 of the other victims, and an adoption law expert. By the end, I was crying and Dad was holding me. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages on social media, many from women sharing their own stories of coerced adoptions. Adoption reform advocates reached out, asking if I'd testify before state legislators. News outlets requested follow-up interviews. I just wanted my life back. But my life would never be what it was before. My mother was arrested formally 2 weeks after the initial investigation began. I watched the news footage of her being led out of the police station in handcuffs. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. When she saw the cameras, she tried to hide her face. Part of me felt vindicated. But mostly, I just felt sad. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early December. I'd have to testify about what Mom had done, about finding the documents, about the isolation. Diane prepared me, explained what the defense would likely argue, coached me on how to stay calm under cross-examination. Mom's lawyer is going to try to paint this as a misunderstanding, Diane said. They'll claim your mother believed she was acting in your best interests. They'll say the money was always meant for you. They'll try to make her look like a concerned parent who made a mistake. But that's not what happened. No. And we have the evidence to prove it. But you need to be prepared for them to attack your credibility. You're a pregnant teenager. They'll try to make you look irresponsible or confused. I'm not confused. I know exactly what she did. Good. Hold on to that. The hearing was in a courthouse downtown, a massive building with marble floors and security checkpoints. Patricia walked in with me, and Mrs. Henley sat in the gallery. Dad was there too, but on the opposite side from Mom. The divorce was proceeding rapidly. When I took the stand, I looked directly at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The prosecutor, a woman named Martinez with a calm, methodical approach, walked me through the timeline. When did you discover you were pregnant? When did you tell your mother? What did she say? How did she convince you not to tell anyone else? I answered every question clearly, my voice steady. I'd practiced this, rehearsed it until I could recite the facts without falling apart. Then came the cross-examination. Mom's lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who smiled too much, tried to suggest I'd misunderstood Mom's intentions. That maybe she'd been researching adoption options in case I decided that's what I wanted. That teenage girls often feel overwhelmed and might misinterpret their parents' protective instincts. I sat there and listened to him try to rewrite reality. When he finished his questions, Martinez stood up for redirect. Claire, did your mother ever ask you what you wanted to do about your pregnancy? No. Did she ever present you with multiple options and let you choose? No. Did she ever tell you that you had the right to keep your baby if you wanted to? No, she never talked about it as my baby. She called it the pregnancy or the fetus. She never let me think of it as a real person. Why do you think that was? Because if I thought of it as a real person, I might not want to give it up, and she'd already promised it to someone else. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, took notes throughout my testimony. When I was dismissed, she looked at my mother. Mrs. Morrison, is there anything you'd like to say at this time? Mom's lawyer advised her not to speak. She shook her head, her eyes downcast. The judge scheduled the trial for March. Mom was released on bail, with conditions that she have no contact with me whatsoever. Dad got a restraining order as an extra precaution. I was 8 months pregnant when Tyler and I made our final decision. We met with Rita and Steven, the couple from Oregon who'd been trying to adopt for 6 years. They were both 34, high school teachers who'd bought a farmhouse with the intention of filling it with children. But biology hadn't cooperated, and adoption agencies kept passing them over for younger couples. When we met them at a neutral location, a family lawyer's office that specialized in ethical adoptions, I liked them immediately. Rita had kind eyes and an easy laugh. Steven was quieter, but you could see the hope and fear warring in his expression. We talked for 2 hours. About their lives, their values, what kind of parents they wanted to be. About my pregnancy, my plans, what I needed from this arrangement. Angela was there, making sure Tyler and I understood every legal aspect. At the end, Rita asked me a question that sealed it. What do you want for your baby, Claire? Not what anyone else wants. What do you want? I thought about it. I want my baby to grow up knowing they were loved. That they didn't end up with you because I didn't want them, but because I wanted them to have the best possible life, and I couldn't provide that at 17. I want them to know their birth parents' names, to have access to their medical history, to understand their story. And I want to know they're okay, that they're happy. Rita was crying. We can do that. We want to do that. This wouldn't be a closed adoption where you disappear. You'd be part of their story. Always. We arranged an open adoption. Photos and letters twice a year until the child turned 18. Then they could decide if they wanted direct contact. Tyler and I would always know our child was safe and loved, but we wouldn't interfere with Rita and Steven's parenting. The legal paperwork was handled by an actual licensed agency this time, with lawyers who explained everything in detail. I had a 30-day revocation period after the birth where I could change my mind. Rita and Steven agreed to it without hesitation. This has to be your choice, Rita said. Not ours, not your mother's, not anyone else's. Yours. I gave birth to a girl on March 14th at 6:23 in the morning. Labor was long and difficult. 18 hours of contractions that felt like my body was tearing in half. Dad was there, holding my hand, talking me through it. Tyler was there too, looking terrified, but staying strong. When they placed her in my arms, I felt my whole world shift. She was perfect, tiny and pink and screaming with impressive lung capacity. She had Tyler's dark hair and my nose. Her fingers were impossibly small, wrapping around my thumb with surprising strength. I held her for 2 hours. I memorized her face, the way her eyes were still that newborn blue-gray, the tiny birthmark on her left shoulder blade. I counted her fingers and toes. I breathed in that newborn smell everyone talks about. Tyler held her next, tears streaming down his face. He whispered promises to her, told her she'd have a good life, apologized for not being able to give it to her himself. You're going to have amazing parents, he told her. And someday when you're older, I hope you'll want to know us. Then Rita and Steven came in. I watched Rita's face as I placed my daughter in her arms. She looked down at this tiny human and transformed, became a mother in that instant. Steven couldn't stop staring, his eyes full of wonder and joy and disbelief. What will you name her? I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Rita looked at me. We'd like to call her Grace, if that's okay with you. Because this is Grace. I nodded, unable to speak. Grace. It was perfect. The hardest moment was leaving the hospital the next day. My arms felt empty. My breasts were swollen with milk for a baby who wasn't there. The nurse gave me medication to dry up my supply, along with pamphlets about post-adoption grief. Dad drove me home in silence. When we got to the apartment, I went straight to my room and slept for 14 hours. The post-adoption period was harder than I'd expected. My body didn't understand where the baby had gone. My hormones were crashing. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. thinking I heard a baby crying, then remember. Angela came over daily for the first week. She brought meals, did laundry, sat with me while I cried. Mrs. Henley and Diana visited. Tessa came after school every day. Tyler stopped by, and we'd sit together in silence, both of us processing what we'd done. The 30-day revocation period was torture. Every day I questioned my decision. Every day I wanted to call Rita and Steven and take it back. But every day I also knew I'd made the right choice for Grace. When the 30 days passed and I hadn't revoked, the adoption became final. It was done. Grace was legally theirs. I cried for an hour, but I also felt a strange sense of peace. The trial against my mother started the week after the adoption finalized. I had to testify again, this time at length and in more detail. The prosecution brought in the other victims, now willing to speak publicly. We heard from Virginia, who'd taken a plea deal and was testifying against everyone else involved in the scheme. The evidence was overwhelming. Contracts, emails, bank records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars changing hands. Text messages where Mom celebrated closing the deal. Recorded phone calls where she and Virginia discussed manipulating me. Mom's defense was that she'd believed she was helping me, that she'd gotten involved with a corrupt organization without realizing it. But the jury didn't buy it. The evidence showed she'd been an active, willing participant, guilty on all charges. The verdict came back after 3 days of deliberation. My mother got 6 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years probation. Virginia got 12 years. Several other mothers who'd participated got varying sentences. The adoptive couples were not charged, as investigators determined they'd been victims too, deceived by an agency that looked legitimate. I sat in the courtroom and watched my mother cry as they read the sentence. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant. Mostly, I just felt hollow. Dad and I left the courthouse through a side exit to avoid the media. We drove home in silence. "You okay?" he finally asked. "I don't know what I am. That's okay. You don't have to know." Graduating high school felt surreal. I'd missed a month of classes after Grace's birth, but I'd caught up with help from tutors Mrs. Henley arranged. I walked across that stage 4 months after giving birth, 3 months after my mother went to prison. Dad and Angela and Tyler's dad came to watch. Mrs. Henley and Diana were there. Tessa screamed my name when they called it. I felt held up by all these people who'd fought for me. That night, there was a small celebration at Dad's apartment. Nothing fancy, just pizza and cake. But it mattered. I'd survived something that should have broken me, and I'd made it to this milestone. I'd gotten into the state university with a partial scholarship. I planned to study social work. Tyler was going to community college for engineering. We'd remain in each other's lives, connected forever by Grace. 2 months after graduation, I got the first letter from Rita and Steven. The envelope was thick, stuffed with photos. Grace at 2 months old, her face filling out, her eyes still that blue-gray. Grace sleeping in a crib painted soft yellow. Grace in Rita's arms, in Steven's arms, with their 2 rescue dogs who'd apparently appointed themselves her guardians. The letter started, "Dear Claire." I read it 3 times, crying through all of them. Grace is thriving. She loves music and bath time. She's starting to smile. Every day we wake up grateful that you chose us. We think about you often and hope you're doing well. We want you to know that Grace will always know about you, about Tyler, about the love that brought her to us. Thank you for this incredible gift. Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for being brave enough to choose what was best for her, even when it cost you everything. I put the photos on my desk where I could see them every day. Grace would never be mine, but she was healthy and loved and safe. That had to be enough. Tyler and I weren't together anymore, but we'd remained friends, connected by Grace in a way that made a romantic relationship feel unnecessary. We met up once a month, usually for coffee, to talk about school and life and the letters from Rita and Steven. When the second set of photos arrived 6 months later, we looked at them together. Grace at 6 months, sitting up, grabbing for toys. Her hair was getting longer, curlier. She had my smile. "She's beautiful," Tyler said quietly. "Yeah, she really is. Do you ever regret it?" I thought about it. Regret that my mom tried to take away my choice? Yes. Regret the choice I made? No. Grace is exactly where she's supposed to be. My relationship with my dad grew stronger. He'd been devastated by Mom's betrayal, not just of me, but of our whole family. He went to therapy twice a week, working through his guilt over not seeing what was happening. He told me repeatedly that he'd spend the rest of his life making sure I knew I was valued and supported. One night over dinner, he asked me a question I'd been dreading. "Do you want to visit your mother? She's allowed visitors now." "I don't know. Do you?" He was quiet for a long time. Part of me thinks I should. We were married for 22 years, but I don't know who that person is. The woman I married wouldn't have done this. Maybe she was always capable of it. We just never saw it. Dad pushed his food around his plate. I keep thinking about all the times she made decisions for our family. About money, about your school, about our vacations. I thought we were making those decisions together. But looking back, I think she was always in control and just made it seem like a partnership. That's what she did to me too. Made it seem like we were figuring things out together, when really she'd already decided everything. I'm so sorry, Claire. You deserved better. From both of us. You didn't know, Dad. She hid it from you on purpose. I should have known. I should have been more present. I reached across the table and took his hand. You're present now. That's what matters. I started college that fall, moving into a dorm room I shared with a girl named Kennedy who was studying marine biology. She was funny and kind and had no idea about my past, which felt like a gift. For the first time in months, I could just be Claire, the college student, not Claire, the girl whose mother tried to sell her baby. But eventually, the story came out. My roommate asked about the elephant plushie I kept on my desk, the one Rita and Steven had sent as a connection to Grace. I told her everything, watching her face carefully for judgment. "You gave up a baby," Kennedy said softly. "That must have been impossibly hard." It was, but it was also right. She hugged me then, and I realized I'd found another kind of family, people who knew my story and loved me anyway. My classes were challenging, but fulfilling. Psychology, sociology, child development, family systems. Every class felt relevant to what I'd been through. My professors didn't know my story at first, but I found myself using my experiences in discussions and papers. One professor, Dr. Ellis, who taught a class on family trauma, pulled me aside after a particularly emotional discussion about parental betrayal. "You speak from experience," she said. "Not a question." "Yes. If you're ever interested in research or advocacy work, let me know. The field needs people who truly understand what they're studying." I became involved in campus advocacy programs. There was a group that helped students in crisis, connecting them with resources and support. I joined and eventually became a peer counselor, talking with students dealing with family issues, pregnancy scares, abusive situations. Every conversation reminded me why I was doing this. Every person I helped felt like honoring what Grace and I had been through. Tyler and I continued our monthly coffee meetings throughout freshman year. He was excelling in his engineering classes, dating a girl named Beth who knew about Grace and supported him. I was happy for him. When the second year of photos arrived, showing Grace at her first birthday party, we looked at them together in the student union. "She's walking," Tyler said, pointing at a photo of Grace taking wobbly steps between Rita and Steven. "She has your eyes," I said. They'd finally settled into a dark brown, like his. We sat there for a while, just looking at the photos of the child we'd created but couldn't raise. "Think we made the right choice?" Tyler asked. "I look at her face in these pictures and I know we did. She's so happy." He nodded. "Yeah, she really is." Sophomore year brought new challenges. I declared my major in social work officially and started taking more intensive classes. The workload was brutal, but I thrived on it. I also started volunteering with Child Protective Services, shadowing social workers on home visits and case assessments. Patricia, the CPS worker who'd handled my case, was still there. She took me under her wing, teaching me the ropes. "You have good instincts," she told me after one particularly difficult case. "You know how to talk to scared kids because you've been there." I learned to recognize the signs of abuse, neglect, coercion. I learned how systems failed families and how to work within those systems to create change. I learned that sometimes the best thing you could do was simply believe someone when they said something was wrong. During winter break of sophomore year, I received a letter from my mother. It was the first correspondence I'd gotten from her since she went to prison. Dad had been receiving letters regularly and had asked if I wanted them. I'd always said no, but this one came directly to me, to my dorm address. She must have gotten it from Dad. I let it sit on my desk for 3 days before opening it. "Dear Claire," it began. The letter was 6 pages long, handwritten on yellow legal paper. She wrote about prison, about therapy, about the other women she'd met who'd done terrible things to their children. She wrote about guilt and shame and trying to understand why she'd made the choices she had. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she wrote on page 4. "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. I told myself I was protecting you, saving you from hardship, but the truth is, I was selfish. I saw an opportunity to make money, and I took it, and I justified it by convincing myself you'd be grateful someday. You were never going to be grateful. You should never have had to be grateful. You should have been supported, trusted, given every resource to make your own choice. I failed you as a mother in the most fundamental way possible. I hope Grace is happy. I hope you're happy. And I hope one day you can tell Grace that despite everything, despite me, you were strong enough to choose love over fear." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I wasn't ready to respond. Maybe I never would be. But I'd read it, and that felt like something. Kennedy found me crying in our dorm room that night. She didn't ask what was wrong, just climbed into bed with me and held me while I sobbed. Grace turned 2 in March of my sophomore year. Rita sent a video instead of just photos. Grace was in their backyard, toddling around with their dogs, laughing at something off camera. She had my nose, Tyler's hair, and a personality that seemed entirely her own, bold and curious and joyful. At the end of the video, Rita turned the camera on herself. "Claire," she said, her eyes soft, "I want you to know that we talk about you. Not constantly, but when it feels right. We tell Grace she has a birth mother who loved her so much, she made sure she had the best life possible. We have photos of you and Tyler in her baby book. When she's older, we'll tell her more. But for now, she knows she's loved by so many people." She paused, and I could see her getting emotional. "Thank you. Thank you for trusting us with her. Thank you for this incredible gift. Thank you for being brave." I watched that video probably 50 times. Each time I felt more certain that despite everything, despite the trauma and betrayal and pain, something beautiful had come from it all. I didn't visit my mother in prison, but I did start responding to her letters. Short responses at first, acknowledging that I'd received her letter, that I'd read it, that I was working through things in therapy. Not forgiveness, not yet, but communication. Dad started dating a woman named Linda during my junior year. I was nervous at first, protective of him after everything with Mom, but Linda was different. She was a social worker, actually, which felt like fate. She worked with domestic violence survivors. When Dad told her about what had happened, she didn't try to psychoanalyze or offer platitudes. She just said, "Your daughter is incredibly strong, and you're a good father for standing by her." Over time, I grew to love Linda. She treated me like an adult, never tried to mother me or replace Mom. She asked about my work, my classes, Grace. She shared stories from her own work, helping me understand the broader context of family trauma. One night over dinner at their apartment, Linda asked me about forgiveness. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive your mother?" I thought about it. I don't know. Some days I think maybe, someday. Other days I know I'll never get there. But I'm learning that I don't have to forgive her to move forward with my life. That's very mature. I don't feel mature. I feel like I was forced to grow up too fast. Linda reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's true. But look at what you've done with it. You've turned trauma into purpose. That's remarkable." Junior year, I got accepted into a competitive internship with a nonprofit that worked on adoption reform. They were pushing for legislation that would protect birth mothers, require informed consent, and shut down agencies that engaged in coercive practices. My job was to help compile case studies and prepare testimony for legislators. I interviewed dozens of women who'd been through similar situations. Each story broke my heart and made me more determined. One woman, Patricia, different from the CPS Patricia, had been 16 when her mother sold her baby for $200,000. She was now 34 and had just recently found her daughter through DNA testing. The reunion had been complicated, painful, beautiful. Does she hate you? I asked Patricia carefully. Your daughter? She hated the situation. She was angry for a long time. But she doesn't hate me. She understands I was a child too, that I had no power. Do you hate your mother? Patricia was quiet for a long time. I did. For years I hated her with everything in me, but the hate was destroying me, not her. So I worked through it in therapy and found something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but release. She doesn't get to take up space in my heart anymore. I thought about that conversation for days. The idea of release resonated with me more than forgiveness ever had. The letters from Rita and Steven kept coming, twice a year like clockwork. Grace at 2.5 starting preschool, Grace at 3 learning to ride a tricycle. Each photo showed a happy, thriving child. Tyler and I continued to meet regularly, though less frequently as we both got busier. He was engaged now, planning a wedding for after graduation. His fiancée knew about Grace, had looked at the photos with him, supported his connection to his birth daughter. I'm happy for you, I told him over coffee. Thanks. Beth is amazing. She gets it, you know? She understands Grace is always going to be part of my story. Will you tell your other kids about her? When you have them? Yeah, I think so. They should know they have a half-sister out there. Senior year arrived faster than I expected. I was taking a full course load, working part-time with CPS, volunteering with the adoption reform nonprofit, and preparing my applications for graduate programs. I barely slept, but I'd never felt more purposeful. My thesis project focused on coerced adoptions and their long-term impact on birth mothers. I interviewed 30 women, analyzed decades of data, built a case for why current adoption laws were insufficient. My advisor called it some of the most important research she'd seen from an undergraduate. You should publish this, she said. And I did. A modified version appeared in a family law journal during my last semester. Suddenly, I was getting emails from lawyers, advocacy groups, legislators, people who wanted to know more, to use my research to push for change. I graduated with honors, summa cum laude, with a degree in social work and a job offer from the same nonprofit where I'd interned. Tyler graduated the same day with his engineering degree. Our families sat together, a strange blended unit brought together by Grace. That night at dinner, Angela raised a glass. To Claire and Tyler, she said, who faced an impossible situation and made the best choice they could, who turned trauma into purpose, who prove every day that strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt tears threatening. I started my master's program that fall, specializing in child welfare policy. The coursework was intense, the field placements demanding, but I loved it. Every class, every placement, every policy analysis felt like honoring what Grace and I had been through. During my first semester, I was invited to speak at a conference on adoption ethics. I stood in front of 300 people and told my story. All of it. The betrayal, the isolation, the choice I'd made. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone started clapping, and suddenly everyone was on their feet. A standing ovation for surviving, for choosing, for fighting back. Afterward, dozens of women came up to share their own stories. Birth mothers, adoptive parents, adult adoptees. Each one thanked me for speaking truth. That was when I realized my voice had power. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd been silenced. My mother was released from prison in my second year of grad school. She'd served 4 years of her 6-year sentence, got out early for good behavior. I found out through Dad, who'd received a notification as part of the divorce settlement. Do you want to see her? He asked. I don't know. Not yet. Maybe never. That's okay. You don't owe her anything. But part of me was curious. 4 years in prison, 4 years of therapy. Had she changed? Could someone change that fundamentally? She sent me a letter within a week of her release. It was shorter than previous ones, more direct. Dear Claire, I'm out. I'm living in a halfway house, working at a grocery store, trying to build something resembling a life. I don't expect anything from you. I don't deserve anything from you. But if you ever want to talk, I'm here. Love, Mom. I put the letter away and didn't respond. Grace turned 4, the spring of my second year of grad school. Rita sent the usual photos, but also included something new. A drawing Grace had made, stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, Grace, and in smaller letters in the corner, Claire and Tyler. She knows your names, Rita wrote. She knows you're part of her story. She asks questions sometimes, and we answer them as honestly as we can at her age. She knows she's loved by more people than just us. I hung the drawing on my refrigerator, where I could see it every day. My thesis for grad school focused on reforming the adoption system to prevent coercion. I proposed new legislation, new oversight systems, new protections for birth mothers. My committee called it groundbreaking. A senator's office reached out, asked if I'd be willing to testify before a legislative committee. I said yes. The hearing was in the state capitol, in a room with marble columns and too many people watching. I sat at a table with a microphone, my prepared testimony in front of me. I looked out at the legislators, at the reporters, at the audience filled with adoption professionals and advocates. And I told my story. Again, for what felt like the 100th time. But this time, it mattered in a different way. This time, people with actual power to change things were listening. The legislation I'd helped draft passed the next year. It required informed consent from birth mothers, mandatory counseling before signing adoption papers, longer revocation periods, stricter oversight of adoption agencies. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The governor invited me to the signing ceremony. I stood behind him as he signed it into law, and when he handed me the pen he'd used, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. Tyler was there too, and Angela. They'd flown in for the ceremony. Afterward, we went to dinner and toasted to Grace. She changed our lives, Tyler said, in every possible way. She saved mine, I replied. I graduated with my MSW 2 months later. I'd already accepted a position with the state's Department of Children and Families, working specifically on adoption policy and oversight. My first day, I put Grace's drawing in a frame on my desk, my reminder of why I was doing this. The job was challenging, often heartbreaking. I reviewed adoption cases, investigated complaints, shut down agencies that weren't following the new regulations. Every case reminded me of what could have happened to me. But now I had power. Now I could stop it from happening to someone else. Grace turned 5 the spring after I started my new job. Rita sent photos of her first day of kindergarten. She was wearing a backpack covered in butterflies, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning at the camera. She's starting to ask more questions about her birth, Rita wrote, about why she came to us. We've been telling her it's because you loved her so much you wanted her to have the best possible life. She seems satisfied with that answer for now, but I imagine the questions will get more complex as she gets older. We'll keep you updated. I wrote back for the first time in years, not just acknowledging the photos, but actually writing a letter. Dear Rita and Stephen, thank you for these photos. Grace is beautiful and clearly thriving. I want you to know how grateful I am that you've kept your promise to be honest with her. When she's old enough to want more complex answers, I'm willing to talk with her, to help her understand. She deserves to know her full story. Thank you for loving her the way she deserves to be loved. Thank you for being the parents I couldn't be. Love, Claire. Dad married Linda that same year. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. I was Linda's maid of honor, something that felt both strange and right. As I stood there watching them exchange vows, I thought about second chances and choosing love even after betrayal. My dad deserved happiness. After everything Mom had put him through, he deserved someone who treated him as an equal partner. During the reception, Dad pulled me aside. I'm proud of you, he said. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that helps people. That's remarkable. I learned it from you, I said. You could have fallen apart when you found out what Mom did. Instead, you showed up for me, every single day. We stood there for a moment, father and daughter, survivors of the same betrayal, stronger because of each other. My mother reached out again during the holidays that year. She wanted to meet, she said, just for coffee, just to talk. I thought about it for weeks. I discussed it in therapy, talked it through with Dad and Linda, with Tyler, with Kennedy, who was still one of my best friends, even though we'd graduated and moved to different cities. Finally, I agreed. One meeting, in a public place, with clear boundaries. We met at a coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon. Mrs. Henley offered to come as a mediator, and I accepted. I needed someone there, someone who would keep me grounded. My mother looked different. Older, obviously, but also smaller somehow. 4 years in prison and 2 years of rebuilding had changed her in visible ways. She had gray hair now, lines around her eyes, and uncertainty in her posture that hadn't been there before. Thank you for meeting me, she said quietly. I didn't respond, just waited. She talked for 20 minutes straight. About prison, about therapy, about understanding finally what she'd done to me, about her own childhood, her own traumas, the ways she'd learned to see people as resources instead of humans, about unlearning that, about building new patterns, about trying to become someone who could live with herself. She didn't make excuses. She didn't minimize what she'd done. She just told me the truth about who she'd been and who she was trying to become. When she finished, I spoke for the first time. Grace is happy. She has good parents. She's exactly where she's supposed to be. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I'm so glad. I think about her sometimes. About what I tried to do. About what she was saved from because you were strong enough to fight back. I didn't fight back. I nearly let you take her. I was hours away from having no choice. But you did fight back. When it mattered, you fought. And you've spent the years since fighting for other girls. That's more than I deserve. It's not for you, I said quietly. It's for them, for me, for Grace. I know. We didn't hug. We didn't make plans to meet again. But I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not exactly, but maybe the beginning of release. She didn't get to take up space in my heart anymore. I left that coffee shop and drove straight to Dad and Linda's house. They were making dinner, moving around the kitchen together like they'd been doing it for decades instead of just a year. How was it? Dad asked carefully. Hard. Okay. I don't know. But it's done. Linda pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you. I continued my work at DCF, rising through the ranks faster than expected. By the time I was 27, I was supervising a team of caseworkers, directly overseeing 50-plus adoption cases at any given time. Every single one got my full attention. My rigorous oversight. Not on my watch. That became my unofficial motto. No more girls like me. No more coerced adoptions. No more babies sold to the highest bidder. Tyler got married when I was 26. I went to the wedding, bringing my boyfriend at the time, a public defender named James who understood the kind of work I did and why it mattered. I watched Tyler marry Beth, who knew his whole story and loved him anyway. During the reception, he introduced me to Beth's parents. Claire basically saved my life, he told them. She showed me what real strength looks like. His mother-in-law hugged me. Thank you for being part of his story. And thank you for being part of mine. Grace turned 6, then 7. Each birthday brought new photos, new drawings, new updates. She was learning to read, to ride a bike, to play piano. Rita and Steven sent videos sometimes now, little glimpses into Grace's daily life. In one video, Grace was at a beach building a sandcastle with Steven. She looked up at the camera and waved. "Hi, Claire," she shouted. "Look what I made!" My heart stopped. She knew who would see this video. She was talking directly to me. I watched it 30 times, crying through most of them. When Grace turned 7, Rita asked if I wanted to Zoom with them. They thought Grace might be ready to meet me, virtually at least, if I was comfortable with it. I wasn't sure I was ready. 7 years of photos and letters was one thing. Actually talking to her, seeing her face in real time, that felt enormous. But I said yes anyway. The call was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. I spent all morning nervous, changing clothes 3 times, practicing what I might say. Kennedy called to give me a pep talk. Dad stopped by with coffee and a hug. "You've got this," he said. When the video connected, there she was. 7 years old, sitting between Rita and Steven, looking curious and a little shy. She had my nose, Tyler's eyes, and a personality that seemed entirely her own. "Hi, Grace," I said, my voice shaking. "It's so nice to finally meet you." "Hi," she said. "You're Claire?" "I am. Mom and Dad say you're my birth mom, that you picked them for me." "That's right. I wanted you to have the best family possible. And they're pretty great, aren't they?" She grinned, and I saw myself in that smile. "Yeah, they're the best." We talked for 20 minutes. Nothing heavy, just small talk. She told me about school, about her friends, about how she was learning to play soccer. I told her I thought about her often, that I was proud of her. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I called Dad. "I just talked to Grace. How was it?" "Perfect. She's perfect." I knew she would be. That conversation opened a door. Grace and I started Zooming once every few months. Rita and Steven were always there, keeping things age-appropriate and comfortable. We'd talk about normal things, favorite foods and books and movies. Grace would show me drawings or things she'd made at school. Slowly, carefully, we built a relationship. Not mother and daughter, but something else. Something good. My career continued to grow. I was promoted to Assistant Director of Adoption Services when I was 28. I gave talks at conferences, trained new social workers, consulted on legislation in other states. My master's thesis had been published as a book, and it was being used in social work programs across the country. People started recognizing me at professional events. The girl who'd survived and fought back. The woman who was changing the system from the inside. But I never forgot where I came from. Every single day, I remembered being 17 and pregnant and terrified. That memory fueled everything I did. I met David when I was 29, at a fundraiser for a child advocacy nonprofit. He was a pediatrician who volunteered at a clinic for underserved families. We talked for 3 hours straight about kids and systems and how to fix the things that were broken. On our third date, I told him about Grace. All of it. The betrayal, the choice, the years of healing. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he took my hand. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said. We dated for a year before he proposed. When he asked, he said he wanted to build a family with me, but only when and if I was ready. That we could adopt, foster, have biological children, or none of the above. Whatever I needed, he'd be there. I said yes. Grace turned 9 a month before my wedding. Rita, Steven, and Grace flew in for the ceremony. It felt right to have them there. To have Grace see that her birth mother had a full, happy life. When Grace walked into the reception, she was wearing a purple dress and her hair was in braids. She looked around wide-eyed at all the decorations, all the people. "You look pretty," she said when she saw me in my wedding dress. "Thank you. You look beautiful too." She smiled, shy again. "Can I dance at your wedding?" "Of course you can." Later, I watched her dance with Steven, her feet on his feet like fathers and daughters do. My heart ached and healed at the same time. Tyler came to the wedding too, with Beth and their baby daughter. They'd named her Lily, and she was 6 months old. Tyler and I took a photo together, holding Lily between us. "Thank you for being my first partner in making impossible choices," I told him. "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." David and I honeymooned in Costa Rica, 2 weeks of beaches and rainforests and not thinking about work. When we came back, we bought a house with a yard and 2 extra bedrooms. "Just in case," we said. My mother sent a card for the wedding. I didn't open it for 2 weeks. When I finally did, it was simple. "Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you have the happiness you deserve. I'm glad you found someone who sees how remarkable you are. Love, Mom." I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. Grace turned 10, then 11. She started asking harder questions about why I'd given her up, about what it had been like, about my mother and what she'd tried to do. Rita called me before one of our Zoom calls. "Grace wants to know more," she said. "The real story, not the kid-friendly version. David and I think she's old enough, but we wanted to check with you first. She deserves to know the truth." That call was different. Grace sat alone in front of the camera. Rita and Steven nearby but not on screen. She looked at me with those serious brown eyes. "Tell me why you gave me up," she said. "The real reason." So I did. I told her about being 17 and pregnant and scared. About telling my grandmother, my mother, and how she'd seemed supportive at first. About discovering the documents, the plan to sell her. About choosing adoption on my own terms. Choosing Rita and Steven because they were ready and I wasn't. I told her about building my life, my career, my purpose. When I finished, Grace was quiet for a long time. "So your mom tried to sell me?" she finally said. "Yes." "But you stopped her?" "Yes." "And then you picked my parents yourself?" "Yes." "Because I loved you. Because I wanted you to have the best possible life. And because Rita and Steven were perfect for you." Grace thought about that. "Thank you. For fighting for me." I started crying then, couldn't help it. "You're welcome, sweet girl." That conversation changed something between us. Made our relationship deeper, more honest. Grace started emailing me directly sometimes. Not just waiting for the scheduled Zooms. She'd tell me about school drama, friend problems, things she was interested in. We were building something real. David and I started the foster to adopt process when I was 31. We wanted to provide a home for kids who needed one, kids like the ones I worked with every day. Our first placement was a sibling pair, ages 3 and 5, who'd been removed from their home due to neglect. It was hard. Harder than I expected. These kids had been through trauma, had behaviors and needs that required patience and consistency and love that never quit. But we did it. Day by day, we showed up for them. Grace turned 12 the year we adopted the siblings. She sent a card and drawing for each of them. "Welcome to the family," she wrote on her card to our daughter Zoe. Because that's what we were. A family. Not traditional, not simple, but real. My mother called on the anniversary of her release from prison. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "I wanted you to know I've been sober for 5 years, she said. "And in therapy the whole time. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to become better." "That's good," I said carefully. "I'm glad you're working on yourself. I saw the article about your promotion. Director of Adoption Services. I'm proud of you." I don't have a right to be proud, but I am. We talked for 10 minutes. It was stilted and awkward, but less painful than previous conversations. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of understanding. People were complicated. They could do terrible things and still be human. They could change, slowly, painfully, in ways that would never undo the harm, but might prevent future harm. I started visiting my mother once a year after that. Always in public, always with boundaries. We'd have lunch and talk about safe things. She met David once, briefly. She never asked about Grace directly, but I could tell she wondered. One year, I showed her a photo. Grace at 13, grinning at the camera, confident and happy. "She's beautiful," Mom said quietly. "I'm glad she's okay. She's more than okay. She's thriving. Because of you. Because you fought." I didn't disagree. Grace turned 14, then 15. She started talking about wanting to meet me in person. Rita and Steven thought she was ready, if I was comfortable with it. I flew to Oregon on a weekend in October. David came with me, nervous and supportive. We stayed in a hotel near Rita and Steven's house. When we pulled up to their house, my hands were shaking. David squeezed my shoulder. "You've got this." Rita and Steven met us at the door. We hugged like old friends who'd been through a war together. Because we had. And then Grace appeared at the top of the stairs. She was 15 now, nearly as tall as me, with Tyler's build and my features and a confidence that was entirely her own. She came down slowly, suddenly shy. "Hi," I said softly. "Hi." We spent the whole weekend together, talking, walking in the woods behind their house, looking at photo albums. Grace wanted to know everything, about my childhood, my career, my life with David and our kids. "Do you ever wish you'd kept me?" she asked on our last night there. I thought carefully about my answer. Sometimes I wonder what that would have been like, but no, I don't wish I'd kept you, because then you wouldn't have this life, with Rita and Steven, in this beautiful place. And this is where you belong. This is where you were always meant to be. She hugged me then, and I held her and cried and felt my heart break and heal simultaneously. When David and I flew home the next day, I felt different, lighter, complete in a way I hadn't been before. "I'm okay," I told David on the plane. "After everything, I'm actually okay." He kissed my forehead. "Yeah, you really are." My mother died suddenly when I was 35. A heart attack, quick and unexpected. Dad called to tell me, his voice uncertain about how I'd react. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm sad, I think. But also, it feels like closure." The funeral was small. Just me, Dad, Linda, and a few of Mom's coworkers from the grocery store where she'd worked. There was no service, just a quiet burial. I stood at her grave and thought about everything between us. The betrayal, the years of silence, the slow, careful rebuilding. She'd never fully made up for what she'd done, but she'd tried. In her own broken way, she'd tried. "I'm sorry you hurt so badly you had to hurt other people," I said quietly. "I hope you found peace." That night, I went home and wrote a letter to Grace. Not to send now, but to give her when she was older, when she might need it. "Dear Grace," I wrote, "you were born out of chaos and deception, but you were loved from your very first moment. Letting you go was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most loving. Your parents chose you with their whole hearts. I chose them for you with mine. You are wanted. You are cherished. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. And if you ever need me, I'll be here. Always. I sealed it and gave it to David for safekeeping. Grace graduated high school when she was 18. I flew out for the ceremony, along with Tyler and Beth and their 3 kids now. We all sat together, this weird blended family connected by one extraordinary girl. When they called Grace's name, she walked across that stage with her head high. She'd been accepted to MIT for engineering, following in Tyler's footsteps. She had dreams and plans and a future stretching out before her. After the ceremony, she found me in the crowd. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for choosing Rita and Steven, for fighting for me, for being part of my life. Thank you." I pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, so incredibly proud." That night at dinner, the whole group of us, Rita and Steven, Tyler and Beth and their kids, David and me and our kids, even Angela and Tyler's dad, we raised glasses to Grace. "To the girl who brought us all together," Rita said. "To the choices that led us here, to family in all its complicated forms." Everyone clinked glasses, and I looked around the table at all these people connected by love and loss and hard choices. This was my life, built from the ashes of betrayal, stronger because of it. Grace was 19 when she asked if she could start calling me by something other than Claire. "Not Mom," she said quickly. "Rita is Mom, but something that acknowledges what we are to each other." "What do you want to call me?" I asked. "Maybe just Mama Claire? Is that weird?" "It's perfect." So that's what I became, Mama Claire. The birth mother who'd loved her enough to let her go, who'd fought to make sure she went on her own terms, who'd built a life and career honoring that choice. I was 40 when I was appointed State Director of Child Welfare Services. My first act was implementing comprehensive adoption reform, building on the legislation I'd helped pass years ago. Every adoption in our state would now require rigorous oversight, mandatory counseling, extended revocation periods, and serious consequences for coercion. Grace came to my swearing-in ceremony. She was 22 now, about to graduate from MIT. She sat in the front row next to David and our kids, and when I looked out at the audience, I saw my entire life staring back at me. Dad and Linda, Tyler and his family, Mrs. Henley, now retired but still my hero, Patricia from CPS, Kennedy and her wife, Rita and Steven, and Grace. Everyone who'd fought for me, believed in me, helped me become who I was. In my acceptance speech, I told a version of my story. Not all the details, but enough. "I became a social worker because of a personal experience with the adoption system," I said. "Because I learned firsthand how vulnerable young mothers can be, how easily they can be manipulated when they're scared and alone. I've spent my career fighting to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. And I'll spend every day in this role continuing that fight." The applause was deafening. That night, at the celebration dinner, Grace stood up to give a toast. "To Mama Claire," she said, her voice steady and strong, "who gave me life twice. Once when she carried me and gave birth to me, and once when she fought for my right to have the best life possible. Everything I am, everything I'll become exists because she was brave enough to choose love over fear. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for being you." I couldn't speak, could only cry and smile and feel the weight of 23 years of choices, of pain, of healing. David leaned over and whispered in my ear, "You did it. You turned the worst moment of your life into something beautiful." I looked around the table, at Grace, thriving, at my family, chosen and built, at the life I'd created from ruins. "Yeah," I whispered back, "I really did." And in that moment, surrounded by love, I finally felt complete. The girl who'd been betrayed at 17 had become a woman who spent her life making sure no other girl would be betrayed the same way. Grace would always be my daughter, even though I wasn't her mother. And that was enough. That was everything. Retry.